It was the kind of sunny afternoon that made you feel like the world had never held a grudge. The old oak tree near the edge of the school field still stood tall, just like it did back in '72, when I was the quiet girl no one noticed, or worse, the one they did. And now, 40 years later, that same tree stood witness again as I walked up the gravel path toward the class reunion. There were white folding chairs scattered across the lawn, a long buffet table draped in blue and gold, and a plastic banner fluttering above the main tent that read, "Welcome back." Class of '82 balloons bobbed gently in the breeze, and familiar faces aged now, softened in the eyes but not always in the heart, gathered in clusters, laughing about stories they remembered, or pretended to. I adjusted the small metal pin on my jacket, just above my heart, not too obvious, not too hidden, just enough to feel real. I had rehearsed this moment in my head a dozen times, but it still felt strange. Returning as someone not the nobody I used to be. "Is that Elaine?" a voice whispered behind me. "She looks different." "Is that a uniform I didn't turn?" I didn't need to. The voices always knew how to reach that old, bruised place. You see, I wasn't the star student, or the prom queen, or the one they passed notes to in class. I was the girl who spoke too softly, wore her brother's hand-me-downs, and sat in the second-to-last row, just far enough to disappear, but close enough to hear everything. And I heard it all back then. The nicknames, the laughter when I tripped in gym class, the silence when I sat down at a lunch table and they all suddenly got up. That kind of thing doesn't leave you. It burrows. But life has a strange way of circling back. I made my way toward the check-in table where a lady with silver curls and a clipboard glanced up. Her mouth fell open for a second before she smiled wide. "Elaine Rivers." "Oh my goodness. I didn't recognize you. You look older," I joked gently. She chuckled. No decorated." I gave a nod. "Still me. Just a few more stamps on the passport." Her eyes flicked to the little stars on my shoulder tabs, then quickly back to my face. I could see it, the shift. That flicker when people try to recalculate where to place you in their mental filing cabinet. "Here's your badge," she said, handing me a sticker with my name and year. "The others are under the main tent." As I walked over, I caught sight of some old classmates by the punch table. Most of them hadn't changed that much. Bigger bellies, thinner hair. But their voices, those carried the same old rhythm, loud, confident, careless. Mark Preston was there, still loud, still charming. Back then, he used to call me Mule because I carried my books in a second-hand satchel too big for my frame. I used to think it was just teasing. Then I realized it wasn't. "Elaine Rivers," he called out, his grin wide. "Wow. Haven't seen you since, well, since you vanished." I smiled politely. "Didn't vanish, just joined the service." "Oh, right. Right, you were in the Army or something, Air Force." He blinked. "Oh, cool. You fly planes and stuff, commanded operations," I said calmly, my voice steady. "Intelligence division, deployed across 5 continents, retired 2 years ago as a major general. You could have dropped a pin." There was a long pause, and then a chuckle. "No kidding. You really climbed the ranks." "Huh?" I tilted my head. "I did." "Well, I'll be damned," someone else murmured. "She's a general. I wasn't there to prove anything. I didn't even want to bring it up." But the moment seemed to shift, like a stage light turned ever so slightly. I could feel the eyes now, not mocking, but measuring. And that's when it happened. The rhythmic beat of rotor blades rolled over the field, slow at first, then louder, deeper, shaking the folding chairs and sending a ripple through the crowd. Everyone looked up, A black military helicopter emerged from the horizon, low and sure, cutting across the blue sky with precision. It circled once not too close before descending onto the open lawn behind the oak tree, where the field curved out toward the lake. Gasps erupted. What in the world? Is it an emergency? The blades spun slower as the chopper landed. Dust and grass danced around its feet. The door opened, and out stepped a young pilot in full uniform. He walked quickly toward the group under the tent, right toward me. "General Rivers," he said with a salute. "We need you." The whole lawn went silent. The same Mark who used to trip me in the hallway stared with his mouth slightly open. Someone dropped a cup. My sister's old friend, who once wrote "flat tire" on my locker in lipstick, blinked like she'd seen a ghost. I looked around, then back at the pilot. Understood. I took a breath. Not because I was surprised we had arranged the flyover as part of a local Veterans Week event. They just didn't know it was me they were honoring. I hadn't told them, didn't need to. But now, it mattered. I turned to the crowd. "Apologies. I'll be brief," I said gently. And then I walked. Each step past the stunned faces felt like a quiet stitch in an old wound that had finally decided to close, not with revenge, just resolution. As I climbed into the helicopter, the pilot glanced sideways at me. They didn't know, did they? I shook my head. Didn't matter before, but maybe it does now. We lifted off. The world below shrank, but the weight in my chest lifted. Because sometimes, just sometimes, you don't need applause. You just need peace. And maybe the sound of a helicopter cutting through the sky over a field where you once felt invisible. We didn't fly far, just past the tree line. The helicopter hovered over a clearing near the Veterans Memorial, then touched down again. This part was planned. The brass plaque, the flagpole, the foldable chairs already set in neat rows. It was all part of the local remembrance ceremony I had quietly agreed to speak at. But standing inside that roar of propellers a few minutes ago, surrounded by people who once laughed at me, I realized something I never told them anything. Not back then. Not during those long school years when silence felt safer than honesty. Not when I had to borrow shoes 2 sizes too big because my mother couldn't afford new ones. Not when my father left and we spent nights with no lights, counting dinner in spoonfuls. And certainly not when I enlisted at 19, because I didn't know where else to go. No one knew. They saw a quiet girl with limp hair and hand-me-downs and thought that was the whole story. But even back then, I carried so much more. I carried the weight of keeping my family together after Dad vanished. I carried my little brother's lunch bag to school with an extra sandwich inside the one I skipped so he wouldn't go hungry. I carried guilt, fear, and a secret, flickering fire that someday, somehow, I would become someone, but the weight they gave me, the mockery, the names, the stares that was heavier. And that's why I never looked back. Not after I shipped out. Not after I was promoted. Not even after the commendation from the Joint Chiefs. I never returned to that school. Never opened the alumni letters. Never checked the reunion website until 2 months ago, when my brother sent me a link. "Elaine," he said on the phone, "I think it's time. Time for what I had asked. To let them see." So I went. Not to prove them wrong, but because part of me needed to look my old shadow in the face, to see if it still had teeth. Now, standing before the crowd at the memorial, a smaller crowd than at the reunion, mostly veterans and quiet families, I saw different faces. Faces that had known real pain, not playground cruelty. Faces with medals on their lapels and folded flags in their arms. The speaker called my name. I stepped up to the podium. The mic squeaked slightly as I adjusted it. "Thank you for being here," I began, my voice steady but low. I don't often speak at these things. Not because I don't feel the weight of it, but because sometimes silence is easier. I let the words settle. There's a lot I've carried quietly, some of it from service, some from childhood. And today, I think it matters to share something I've never said out loud. I looked across the rows. Some stood, some sat with heads bowed. A boy clutched a framed photo of a man in uniform. A woman twisted her wedding ring, her eyes misty. I came from a place where I was taught not to take up space, I said. Where speaking up got you laughed at. Where dreaming big was something you kept secret. I took a breath. But the military didn't ask where I came from. It asked what I could give. And slowly, it gave me back something I didn't know I had my voice. The wind picked up. A flag snapped behind me. I wasn't always a general. I was once the girl in the corner, invisible and small. But I want every kid sitting quietly today, every woman who doubts her strength, every man who thinks he's been forgotten. I want you to know there's no rank for courage. You don't need medals to matter. I paused again, this time letting the silence speak for me. Then, quietly, I stepped down. There was no applause, just the slow rustle of people standing in respect. And that was enough. After the ceremony, I lingered by the edge of the clearing. The pilot chatted nearby with some ROTC cadets, and I took a moment alone under a pine tree. That's when she came. Elaine. I turned. It was Dana Hall, the girl who sat 2 seats behind me in every class, the one who used to pretend not to hear when others teased me. Her face had aged gently, but her voice still held that soft, breathy tone. I almost didn't believe it when they said it was you. She said, "It's me." She looked down, then back at me. "I'm sorry. I didn't speak. I should have said something. Back then. I mean, when they were cruel. I wasn't brave. Neither was I. I wanted to say. But instead, I just nodded. We were kids. I replied. She looked relieved. You're incredible. You know, I saw your speech. I saw the landing. My daughter's in the Air Force now. You're her hero. That caught me off guard. I smiled. A little. I'm glad. I said. Tell her I'm proud of her. I will. She hesitated, then opened her purse, pulled out a worn envelope. I kept this, she whispered. From our yearbook. You wrote it. Remember, to anyone who ever felt invisible, we matter, even if no one sees it yet. I found it when I was cleaning my attic. It helped me through my divorce. I wanted you to know. I stared at the faded ink, the shaky handwriting that once belonged to a girl too afraid to speak out loud, and suddenly, the years between then and now didn't feel so sharp. Just soft, like mist burning off in morning light. Thank you for showing me that, I said, and for the first time in a long time, I meant it. Later that evening, back in my hotel room, I sat by the window, the badge from the reunion still pinned to my jacket. The stars were out. The oak tree was a shadow in the distance, and I thought about the long letter I once wrote but never sent, the one I kept folded in a shoebox through every base transfer and deployment. A letter to my past classmates, a letter that simply said, you laughed, I listened, you forgot. I remembered. You moved on, I moved up, and now, I return not for revenge, but because I outgrew the silence you left in me. Maybe I'll send it now, or maybe I won't need to, because sometimes, showing up as yourself is the loudest thing you can ever do. I didn't sleep much that night. You'd think after all these years, medals, deployments, and speeches, I'd be used to moments like this. But there was something different about coming back, about standing in the very place where I once disappeared, and watching people's expressions change when they realized I had become someone they couldn't ignore. I sat by the small desk in my hotel room, the kind with an old lamp and a faint coffee ring on the wood, and looked out the window. The reunion tent had been taken down. Only the field remained quiet again, like it had been all those years ago, just after graduation. There's something odd about silence. In war zones, it means danger. In family dinners, it means someone's hiding pain. In classrooms, it used to mean no one saw me. But now, silence just felt like space I could finally take up. I reached into my bag and pulled out the letter again. The one I wrote when I was 19. The one I never sent. Dear Class of '82, I used to think your silence was the truth, that I didn't matter, that I was weak, that kindness meant invisibility. But the truth is, you didn't know me. I wasn't loud. I didn't wear nice clothes. I didn't flirt or fight or laugh too loudly, but I was strong. You just didn't look close enough to see it. I folded the letter back up. Maybe they had finally seen it now. The next morning, I checked out of the hotel and took one last walk through the town square. Some buildings had changed new coffee shops, brighter signs, but others were exactly the same. The diner with the cracked window, the bookstore with the crooked awning, and of course, the bench across from the school where I used to sit during lunch, reading because it was easier than trying to join a conversation I was never invited into. I walked over and sat down. A teenager sat at the far end, earbuds in, hoodie pulled up, sketching something in a notebook. He looked up, nodded politely, then went back to his drawing. Funny. That used to be me. You draw? I asked gently. He looked surprised that I spoke. Yeah, I smiled. I used to sit here too. Long time ago. He blinked. You go to school here. Graduated before your parents probably did. I chuckled. He half smiled, then looked down. This school kinda sucks. I nodded slowly. Yeah, sometimes it does. He glanced over at me. They don't really see you here. You know, I looked him in the eye, and for a moment, I saw a familiar shadow. That quiet ache of invisibility, the longing to be noticed, not for the noise you make, but for the things you quietly carry. I know, I said. But they're not the only ones who get to decide who you are. He tilted his head. What do you mean? I hesitated. Then, slowly, reached into my pocket and pulled out my military badge. Not the one I wore to the reunion, a smaller one. My brother had framed it for me, a token of all those years I spent fighting battles most people would never see. I handed it to him. Keep this, I said. Not because you earned it, but because you will. Someday. And when that day comes, you'll remember this moment. He stared at it like it weighed more than it looked. Are you like famous or something? I chuckled. Just someone who used to sit where you're sitting now. He didn't say anything after that, just nodded slowly, tucking the badge into his sketchbook like it was gold. And as I stood to leave, I felt it again, that quiet stitch in an old wound. This time, it wasn't pain. It was peace. Back home, the days moved slower. I returned to my small house near the base, where the garden needed tending and the dog was too old to bark at squirrels anymore. The photos on the wall told their own story: awards, team photos, a framed newspaper clipping from a humanitarian mission, but there was one space still empty. I stood in front of it that evening, holding the reunion badge in my hand. It didn't seem like much, just a sticker. Elaine Rivers, Class of '82. But it was more than that. It was proof that I went back, not to impress, not to confront, but to stand tall where I was once made small. I framed it and hung it in the empty space, not next to the medals, not under the citations, but in its own corner, quiet, like the girl I used to be. A week later, I received a letter in the mail, It had no return address, just a neat handwriting I didn't recognize. Inside was a note. Dear General Rivers, I was at the reunion. You don't remember me, but I remember you. I was one of the ones who laughed. Not because I hated you, but because it was easier than admitting I was just like you, scared, quiet, unsure. I saw you that day. I saw the helicopter, the pilot, the salute, but mostly, I saw the girl we all ignored, come back as someone we all wanted to be. Thank you. For showing me that becoming someone doesn't mean becoming cruel. Sincerely. A classmate who finally gets it. I read it twice. Then again. And for the first time in a long time. I cried. Not the kind of tears that fall in pain, but the kind that arrive when something finally lets go, when the old voice in your head that said you don't matter finally goes quiet. Sometimes, I walk by that field in my mind, the oak tree, the tent, the stairs. But now I carry something else with me too, the silence. Not the kind they gave me, but the kind I've earned, the kind filled with peace, not absence, the kind that says, you made it through, and you did not disappear. A few days after the letter arrived, I got a phone call from my younger brother, Charlie. He rarely calls without texting first, but that day, he just rang. I picked up and heard his voice still with that same dry humor, still always slightly ahead of a laugh. You famous now, General? I chuckled. Didn't you know I've been famous since I sat on that bench with my peanut butter sandwich? He laughed. Nah. I saw the article. The local paper ran a photo of the helicopter landing. Said you commanded silence better than a microphone ever could. That's some serious power. I let the silence on my end stretch a little. Not heavy, just warm. I didn't expect that. I said honestly, any of it. Well, you didn't go looking for it. That's why it came. There was something about Charlie's voice, ever since we were kids when Dad left, when Mom started fading into her own sadness. When the house felt too quiet, it was Charlie who reminded me there was still some light to follow. Remember when you used to tape your school notes to the bedroom wall, he asked. Yeah, that was how I studied. That wasn't studying, he said, amused. That was building your own boot camp. You had schedules taped to the door, and you made me run vocabulary drills at dinner. You turned out all right. I turned out great. Thanks to you, he said, softly now. That quiet moment stretched again. Charlie, I said after a pause. You really think it mattered me showing up? Are you kidding? You went back and stood on the very soil that tried to bury you. You didn't just survive. Elaine, you grew roots. Deep ones. I blinked, feeling the burn behind my eyes. They didn't know who I was back then. They do now. But more importantly, you know who you are. You didn't need their permission. You never did. I smiled, biting back tears. Thanks, kid. I'm older than you in spirit, he teased. Only in stubbornness. We hung up not long after, and I sat there, thinking. That phone call meant more than all the salutes, all the speeches, because it reminded me I didn't raise myself. I wasn't alone in the trenches of my childhood. Charlie was always there too, even when the world didn't notice either of us. A week passed. I was out tending the small herb garden behind my house when I heard tires crunching on the gravel drive. I peeked over the fence and saw a young woman getting out of a dusty sedan. She looked early 20s, short ponytail, pressed khakis, military posture. She knocked lightly on the gate. General Rivers. That's me. I'm Lieutenant Hall, Dana's daughter. I raised my brows. Oh, come in, please. She stepped in, glanced around the garden, clearly unsure of where to start. My mom told me everything, about the reunion, about what you said. She said you gave a speech that made her cry, and She gave me this. The lieutenant pulled out my old yearbook quote, folded and faded. I carried this in my wallet the day I left for officer training, she said. And when I made it through, I decided, someday I'd find you. I was stunned. And here you are. She smiled. I guess I just wanted to say thank you for being who you were when it was hard. Because I think that's what I needed most, not a perfect role model, just proof that strength grows quietly sometimes. That hit me hard. I leaned against the fence, nodded, and said, "It does. It really does." We sat for a few minutes on the garden bench. She asked me about deployment, about fear, about silence and loneliness, and I told her the truth that it never goes away entirely, but it stops owning you when you carry it with purpose. Before she left, she handed me a small gift patch with her unit's insignia and her call sign stitched into it. Echo. That was my nickname, she said, because I don't talk much. But when I do, people tend to listen. I held the patch gently. Wear it well. Echo. And I meant it. That night, I finally opened the email I'd been ignoring for weeks. The alumni newsletter editor had written me, asking for a short article about the reunion. From my perspective, they wanted a feel-good story, a headline, but I didn't want to give them something shiny. So I wrote this instead. It wasn't the helicopter that made me feel powerful. It wasn't the speech. It was seeing the faces of the people who once looked through me, now looking at me and realizing I no longer needed their recognition. I came back not to be seen. I came back because I already was. I hit send. A few hours later, they published it without edits. No headline. Just that quote. It circulated more than I expected. Messages started trickling in, not from the classmates, but from their children. People who had grown up hearing their parents' stories and never once heard my name now reaching out to say, "My mom said you changed how she remembers high school. My dad said he never realized how cruel he'd been. My aunt cried when she read your words." I didn't respond to most, just read them quietly, and folded each one into a little corner of peace. Because, really, what more could I want? I still pass that oak tree sometimes, the one on the school field. It's older now, bark split deeper, limbs a little sparser, but it's still rooted, still standing. Like me, once invisible, now unshakable, and when the wind blows just right, I swear, I can hear the echoes of a girl who never stopped believing that someday, even if no one clapped, she'd still rise. There's a drawer in my hallway, third one down, beneath the folded maps and spare keys. I call it the medal drawer. But really, it holds more than ribbons and pins. It holds stories I've never told, each medal like a chapter. Earned not just in the field, but in moments of silence, in letters never sent, in rooms where I stood alone and made a decision no one would thank me for. I opened it one morning, not long after that reunion month had passed. The light outside was soft, the kind that peeks through blinds gently, as if asking permission. I wasn't looking for anything in particular, just remembering. There was the Bronze Star from the year we lost half a convoy and still completed the mission. The Humanitarian Award for setting up medical supplies in a heat-blasted village while bullets sang too close for comfort. The folded flag from Sergeant Miles's funeral, still smelling faintly of the wood polish they used in the chapel. But what caught my eye that morning was something else. A tiny envelope tucked behind a photo. I didn't remember putting it there. It was from my mother. Her handwriting. Still delicate. Still precise. I sat on the edge of the hallway bench and opened it. Elaine. I know I haven't said it the way you deserve to hear it, but I see you now. All those nights you stayed up helping Charlie study. All the mornings you left the house without breakfast so we'd have enough. I saw you. I was just too proud or too scared to tell you what I should have. I hope one day you'll forgive me for not clapping louder. Love. Mom. The envelope had no date, but the paper was brittle with time. I imagined she'd written it years ago. Maybe the night before I left for basic training. Maybe after one of my promotions. Maybe on a quiet morning after watching the news and seeing a name she recognized. I pressed the letter to my chest, not with sorrow, but with stillness. Sometimes, love comes late, but it still arrives. I took a walk that afternoon not out of habit, but because something in me needed the air. The sky was clear, the wind had cooled, and I passed by the old park where, years ago, my classmates used to gather in cliques and whispers. There was a bench there, a new one, polished and smooth. A small plaque on the back read, "To those who returned stronger." I hadn't seen that before. I sat down and watched a pair of young girls swinging from the monkey bars, shouting playful dares. Their voices held no cruelty, just joy. And I wondered if the world had changed, or if maybe it was me, because for the first time in my life, I felt no need to prove anything, not to the people who once overlooked me, not to the voices in my head, not even to the reflection in the mirror that still, sometimes, carries the expression of the girl I used to be. That night, I stood before that mirror. Uniform hung neatly in the closet, hair pulled back the way I always preferred. Just a face now, a woman nearing 60. Lines of laughter and loss carved quietly around the eyes. I looked myself in the eyes and said, softly, "You did it, and you didn't have to shout." That's the thing no one tells you about power. Real power doesn't need to be loud. It doesn't humiliate. It doesn't retaliate. It returns. Stronger, quieter, surer. And sometimes, it wears the face of the girl no one thought would make it out of high school without breaking. The following week, I got an invitation. The high school had decided to name a new scholarship after me, the Rivers Resilience Award, for students who showed quiet leadership, perseverance, and dignity under pressure. I didn't cry when I opened the envelope. I laughed, because I knew, without a doubt, there was once a girl who sat alone at lunch, eating dry tuna sandwiches and solving math problems to escape conversations, and now, her name would help someone else survive. It was the most meaningful honor I'd ever received. Not because it was grand, but because it redeemed the silence. The ceremony came a few months later. It was spring by then. Cherry blossoms scattered across the school lawn like confetti. I wore a simple dress, no uniform, no medals, just me. The principal gave a speech. So did a few teachers. Then a student stepped forward, the first recipient of the award. Her name was Layla, 16. Hair tied back, quiet, steady eyes. She reminded me of someone. "I used to feel invisible here," she said into the mic, voice trembling just a bit, "until I read about General Rivers. And I thought, maybe being quiet doesn't mean you're weak. Maybe it means you're just listening harder." I felt tears rising, but held them steady. She turned and looked at me, right in the eye. "Thank you for listening before you spoke. That gave people like me a place to breathe." After the ceremony, I handed her the old quote from my yearbook, the one that had made its rounds from attic to daughter to lieutenant. To anyone who ever felt invisible, it read, "We matter, even if no one sees it yet." She held it to her chest like it was gold. And in that moment, I didn't need the applause. I had passed the torch. That evening, I returned home and sat by the fireplace, a cup of tea in hand, a notebook open, and I began to write not a speech, not a report, but a letter. To my younger self. "Dear Elaine, you won't believe this, but someday, they'll clap. Not everyone, but enough. And even if they didn't, you'd still be proud of who you became. You'll learn that silence isn't a curse, it's a space, one you can choose to fill with pain or with purpose. And someday, a pilot will land a helicopter just for you, and not because you demanded it, but because you earned it. Keep going, even when they laugh, even when they don't see you. You're not a nobody. You're a general in disguise, with love. The woman you became. The sun was low when I took my final stroll through the field behind the school. It wasn't planned. No invitation, no uniform, no banner fluttering in the wind this time. Just me, walking quietly in civilian clothes. My hands tucked gently into my coat pockets, the cool wind brushing my face like an old friend. I passed the oak tree one last time. Its branches had started to curl downward with age. The leaves rustled faintly, as if whispering secrets only those who'd listened long enough could understand. I stepped closer and placed my hand against its bark. It was rough, strong, familiar, funny. I used to think it watched me suffer, but now I realize it had simply stood with me. Maybe that's all we can ask of the people or things that mark our childhood, not to protect us, not even to save us, but simply to remain, to outlast the storm with us, quietly, like a sentinel of memory. As I stood there, I heard footsteps approaching from the distance. Slow, hesitant. I turned. It was Mark Preston, the boy who once made my name the punchline of the cafeteria, the one who smirked when I got called mute mule in math class, the one whose voice, more than anyone else's, had etched itself into the soundtrack of my silence. He looked older now. Of course he did. We all did. But in that moment, he looked like a boy again, unsure, searching. "Elaine," he said, stopping a few paces away. I didn't reply. Just waited. I've been trying to work up the nerve to say something since the reunion. Still, I said nothing. He took a breath. "I'm sorry. For everything. For what I said. What I didn't say. For not seeing you." I looked at him fully then. Not with anger. Not with righteousness, just with the calm of someone who no longer needed an apology, but who could still honor its effort. "I'm not angry, Mark," I said softly. "I outgrew that version of you a long time ago." He looked down. I figured. But still, I needed to say it. I didn't know how much damage we did back then, until I saw you that day. The helicopter. The way the crowd went silent. It hit me. Like a brick. It wasn't the silence that hurt back then. I told him. It was the noise, the constant hum of being unseen, unheard, made small, but it taught me how to listen, deeply. He nodded. "I've got 2 daughters now. One of them's quiet, like you were. I see her standing back in groups, not talking much. And I wonder if she's hurting like you must have been. I don't want to miss it again. That broke something in me. Not in a painful way, in a healing one. Because there's something sacred about hearing the boy who once silenced you, now trying to raise a girl to feel safe. You haven't missed it yet," I said. He gave a tearful smile and offered his hand. I didn't shake it. Instead, I stepped forward and hugged him. A short, firm, no words needed kind of hug. And that was enough. In the months that followed, I slowed down. Not because I was tired, but because I finally had space to rest. My life had been lived in motion orders, operations, bases, briefings, and now, for the first time, I could breathe in stillness without mistaking it for stagnation. I started teaching part-time at the community college. Not about war, not about rank, but about voice, about leadership, resilience, and finding strength in quiet places. The room filled up faster than I expected. One day, a girl with large glasses and a nervous smile stayed after class. "Ma'am," she said, "do you ever miss it?" Miss what being invisible? I mean, doesn't it feel safer sometimes? I looked at her for a long moment. It does. But only because we've learned to expect less from people. When we finally begin to expect more from the world, from ourselves, the silence starts to feel like a cage. She nodded slowly, tucking her notebook under her arm. Thanks. That helps. Before she left, she turned back once more and said, I hope I'm brave enough someday. I smiled. You already are. You just haven't had to prove it yet. I keep the scholarship letters in a small wooden box now. Every recipient writes one. Some are brief, some are long. All are deeply personal. One girl wrote, I used to flinch when the teacher called my name. Now, I raise my hand. Another said, I thought strength meant yelling louder. Now I know it means standing still when everyone else is running. And one boy, bless him, wrote, I didn't believe people like you existed. I thought the quiet ones disappeared. But you didn't. You flew back in a helicopter and landed like a whisper that turned into thunder. Sometimes, when the house is too quiet and the night stretches long, I sit by my bedroom window and look up at the sky. If I listen hard enough, I can almost hear the hum of the blades again, that low rhythmic pulse that once lifted me above the people who tried to keep me small. But now, it doesn't feel like escape. It feels like homecoming. Because this isn't a story about revenge. It's not even a story about redemption. It's about recognition. That moment when the world finally says, we see you, and you answer. Not with bitterness, but with calm. Not with pride, but with certainty. Yes, I was always here. You just weren't looking. And now that you finally hear the silence I carried all these years, I can lay it down. Not because I need you to carry it, but because I no longer do. Have you ever come full circle like this, not to shout, not to prove, but simply to be seen as who you've always been deep down? I'd love to know what that looked like for you. Even a sentence, even a name. Let's make sure no one goes unseen.